Headliner Nation, if you haven't been paying attention, then I need you to lock yourself in. Training camp has started. And I'll admit, some reports out of training camp you take with a grain of salt. And I don't think I'm that interested in videos of guys running routes in their shorts on air or against six-string defenders that likely won't be there in a couple of weeks anyway. But that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of really good information that we need to be paying attention to that will help us find some risers or some under-the-radar sleepers that no one's really talking about before your draft. And let's kick it off with a guy that has had a ton of question marks this offseason. Who's it gonna be in Tennessee? Tony Pollard or Tyjae Spears? And as of right now, the coach speak out of training camp is favoring Tony Pollard pretty heavily. Titans' new head coach Brian Callahan talked about the versatility and explosiveness of Tony Pollard and what he brings to the table, not only on the ground but through the air as well. To me, it really sounds like the Titans are focused on making him a huge weapon in this offense. And if he is a guy that gets 60% of the backfield touches and he's used accordingly, which is much better than what Dallas did last year, Tony Pollard should greatly outperform his current ADP of RB29. Now, obviously, the Tennessee Titans spent big on Tony Pollard, but there's been concerns. Will Pollard and Spears be more of a 50-50 split? To me right now, it really feels like Pollard will end up being the guy. And if we can get him up to about 60% of the touches, then we should be locking him in as a guy that finishes inside the top 24 running backs. Now, I don't want to give away too much information that is in our draft guide, but I can tell you Jake and myself both extensively wrote on Chase Brown. And the beat reporters in Cincinnati are talking about Chase Brown and what he's been doing with the first team reps so far to begin camp. Chase Brown looks really, really good. And there's a lot of great information to back up how he could be pushing Zach Moss for the RB1 spot in Cincinnati. And Jake and I have been trying to tell you that for a few months already. Right now, Chase Brown's ADP puts him at RB28, while Zach Moss is significantly in front of him at RB26. But if these reports at training camp continue to hold true, there is absolutely no reason that we should be drafting Zach Moss over Chase Brown, given how big the gap is in their ADP. Chase Brown would absolutely end up being the way better return on your investment and a way better bet to outperform his ADP. And again, Jake and I wrote about Chase Brown in our draft guide. So if you're wanting to get access to that, cheat sheets, sleepers, breakout busts, player profiles, and some exclusive content that you can only find from the fantasy headliners, like my dynamic running back rating, use the link in the description below to head on over to our website and order your draft guide right now. It's only $21.99 and it is absolutely chock full of fantasy knowledge that you can use to absolutely smash your draft and run away with your league championships this season. After the video's done, hit up the link below and get yours right now. It's updated all off-season long. Out in Arizona, everyone's been talking about Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride. But what if we add a little big Dortch energy to that as well? Greg Dortch is actually getting some work in the backfield right now as well for the Arizona Cardinals, which is really interesting because they have James Conner, but they also drafted Trey Benson. Now, behind Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride, there isn't really an established number 3 weapon in this offense right now. They brought in Zay Jones from Jacksonville, but I don't know if he's going to be the answer or not. Michael Wilson was a popular breakout sleeper candidate last season, and he showed some flashes, but he wasn't super reliable. Could this end up being the year? But Greg Dortch, if he's going to be used all over the place, maybe he does carve out a role in this offense where he becomes a flex option because he's getting work in the passing game and in the backfield. For me right now, Greg Dortch still isn't a sleeper, and he's not going to be considered a riser as of yet either, but he is someone to keep an eye on until we know for sure that somebody has locked down the third targets within this offense, because somebody's going to have to get them. I think the question about J.K. Dobbins always revolves around when will he stay healthy? Will he ever stay healthy? And right now in Chargers camp, He's playing like a guy that is a man on a mission. And he's talking like a man with a ton of confidence as well. His biggest problem at this point, he's coming back from an Achilles injury. And how many running backs on record have come back from an Achilles injury and been really good for fantasy purposes the year after? Right now, the main backs are Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, and they really could end up splitting quite a bit of a workload to begin the season. But if J.K. Dobbins stays healthy and he shows any type of burst like he used to have in Baltimore, Gus Edwards could be in for trouble because Gus Edwards and his explosiveness and efficiency are actually trending down. Really, anybody could end up being the guy in the Chargers backfield, but we know Jimmy Harbaugh is going to run the crap out of the football. And if J.K. Dobbins is healthy, he should see a decent amount of those. For where he's going, I'm willing to sign up for another year because he's currently being drafted as the RB53. Kamani Vidal, their rookie draft pick, is actually being drafted ahead of him right now. And if Vidal were to get a lot of workload, I do think he could be successful. But I think J.K. Dobbins is also going to get the first shot. And he's being drafted later right now. I'll sign on for some J.K. Dobbins as much as I can at that ADP. Now, from the quarterback perspective, J.J. McCarthy, Sam Darnold, you may not be looking at either of these guys to rely on them in fantasy football unless you're in a 2-quarterback league or maybe some super flex leagues. But these two guys are tied to one of the biggest fantasy assets this draft season with Justin Jefferson. And right now, it's looking like J.J. McCarthy is the guy. Now, there's some mixed reports on both of these quarterbacks. One minute, you'll see somebody saying, yeah, they're doing pretty good. Next minute, that same guy, oh, he threw a pick 6. But when you take a look at the amount of views and the amount of information coming out of Minnesota camp right now, it generally favors the fact that J.J. McCarthy is performing much better than Sam Darnold. And while I believe that Sam Darnold can get the ball to Justin Jefferson, I also believe that J.J. McCarthy is going to give him a much higher ceiling. I still don't think J.J. McCarthy starts the season. I believe it's Sam Darnold. But if McCarthy keeps performing the way he is in training camp right now, we could get him way earlier than we expected. People that are heading on over to the Carolina Panthers training camp are absolutely raving about Xavier Leet right now. This guy could end up being a true down-the-field threat that would absolutely make any fantasy roster a little bit more competitive. But he's tied to Bryce Young. And there's a lot of people right now, when they hear the name Bryce Young, they shiver a little bit, and not in a good way. And because of that, Leggett isn't being drafted until wide receiver 66. This is a guy that actually could end up going undrafted in a lot of redraft leagues. But competition for the #1 overall wide receiver in Carolina's offense is up for grabs. Could it be Leggett? Could it be Adam Thielen coming back for year 2 with Carolina? What about Deontay Johnson? Is he going to be the guy? Right now, we don't know. And Bryce Young is going to be looking to lock in with one of those people. Maybe Xavier Leet doesn't end up seeing the most volume or the most targets, but maybe he sees the most big plays. Redraft leagues, you might not be all in on him, but in best ball leagues, he could end up making for a really nice late round stash. There were quite a few times this offseason when we heard Kyle Pitts' name and how Kirk Cousins was going to be looking his way quite often. And to begin training camp, it does feel like the Atlanta Falcons are trying to get Kyle Pitts and Kirk Cousins on the same page. And I think I speak for every fantasy manager out there when I say we need Kyle Pitts. Now, maybe I don't need him because I want to draft him, but I absolutely need him because I want the tight end position to be a whole lot deeper. Kyle Pitts' first 3 years in the league, underwhelming. Even with a really nice season his rookie year, he still only had 1 touchdown grab. We need to see more touchdowns. We need to see a large amount of volume. And right now in training camp, it looks like Kirk Cousins wants to form that relationship and make sure this season Kyle Pitts is seeing all the targets he can handle. Well, would you look at that? Roman Wilson, another guy that I have brought up in the past and wrote extensively about in our draft guide, that's off to a hot start in training camp. That Deontay Johnson role that needs filled looks like it's going to suit Roman Wilson just fine. And this isn't the only day that people wrote about Roman Wilson, and this wasn't the only person either. If you go over to X or Twitter, if you're old school like me, and search for Roman Wilson, there's gonna be a ton of stuff coming up about him. He's on fire to start Steelers camp. And that role that Deontay Johnson has filled over the last several years, where there are plenty of targets available for, Roman Wilson would fit into nicely. Yeah, George Pickens is the big play guy. Pat Freiermuth is absolutely going to score some touchdowns. They're going to run the ball really well with Jaylen Warren and with Najee Harris. But don't forget about Roman Wilson come draft day. Right now, Roman Wilson is a complete afterthought at wide receiver 77 in ADP. The rookie wide receivers, he's not even on anyone's radar. Everybody's worried about the bigger guys. And Roman Wilson has been completely forgotten about. But he could end up having one of the biggest impacts of any rookie this season at the wide receiver position. Speaking of rookie wide receivers, Javon Baker in New England is showing some of his big playability right off the bat. And he's not just doing it against air. And he's not just doing it against guys that probably won't be there in a couple of weeks. He's doing it against Christian Gonzalez. Javon Baker absolutely is a guy that could establish himself as a big play threat for the New England Patriots early on in the season. He's going to have to work his way into the rotation, but he has the ability to go down the field, and that is something that New England has been missing for quite some time. And I said everybody was forgetting about Roman Wilson. They're forgetting about Javon Baker as well, because his ADP has him at wide receiver 87. In best ball leagues, he's absolutely a guy that you should be spending one of your last picks on right now. In redraft leagues, we probably aren't buying him just yet and not looking at drafting him, but he's going to be on our watch list right away. If he continues to perform like this, and if he has a big preseason, he absolutely could become a guy that finds his way into a few touchdowns this season. All right, let's talk about Daniel Jones and Malik Nabers real quick. No one really cares about Daniel Jones, all right? Definitely not in a one quarterback league. And maybe in a 2 QB Superflex league, you're looking at him as a quarterback too. We care about Daniel Jones because we want to know how it translates to Malik Nabers this season. And right now, Malik Nabers is a guy for me that probably isn't rising as much as people would like you to believe. He looks great in training camp so far. He is making some big plays, and he absolutely looks the part of a big-time wide receiver. But Daniel Jones does not look good to start training camp. Now, he has made some okay throws at times, but largely for the most part, he's underthrowing a lot of wide receivers, and that may be because he's not stepping into his throws after that ACL tear last year. So maybe he does get back to doing that. But even at his best so far, Daniel Jones has just been okay. And his passing numbers have never really been anything to get excited about. From a fantasy perspective, he's added some value because of what he does on the ground. But from a real-life NFL perspective, Daniel Jones is about as inconsistent as they come as a quarterback. And if that happens, Malik Nabers isn't going to be able to go up draft boards. He's going to probably stick directly where he's at right now. And that places him just inside the top 24 at wide receiver 20. That's too expensive for my blood right now. We'll see how things continue to play out. But Daniel Jones is going to need to be way more inconsistent by the time week 1 gets here if we want to invest in Malik Nabers being our actual wide receiver 2 on our team. Yo, Headliner Nation, there you have it. Just a few of the storylines coming out of training camp right now and how they may affect some of the guys that we should be taking a look at in our fantasy draft. Some big name guys and then a few guys that may be under under the radar right now that we should be paying more attention to. If you want more videos like this, let me know down in the comments and hit that like button so I know. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel, turn on our bell notifications so you never miss out of any of the new content when it drops. But for now, Headliner Nation, I'm gonna get out of here. Peace out, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you all on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.